The Unitarian Universalist Church of Corpus Christi. I am the Reverend Chris Hockman, and I am honored to serve as your worship associate this morning. First, I would like you all to give a friendly reminder to silence any of your cell phones or other little noisy devices you have so we can have a quiet worship this morning. We welcome you to our worship service celebrated here each week, mindful of the principles of our free faith. To describe a little about Unitarian Universalism today, I will share with you some words from the Reverend Peter Morales. I am a UU because I am convinced I need other people who love what I love. I am a UU because I want to join hands with others to create a community where we grow spiritually, where we support one another, and where we work together to create a world in which everyone matters, everyone is free, everyone is respected, and everyone lives in peace. I am a UU because I have seen what love, understanding, and commitment can do. And finally, I am a UU because I am convinced that if we let the love in our hearts guide our ways, the possibilities before us are breathtaking. Although we practice a free faith, it is also one that requires responsibility. We have a church covenant, which is a shared agreement that we recite together each week and reminds us of our closely held values. The mission of our church is we learn, we lead, we love. May I have the order of service? Thank you. We have a few announcements today. Right after the service, the teen group will be continuing their now post-Valentine's Day bake sale. So if you have a sweet tooth, please take advantage of that. They will be literally right outside the door when you leave today, tempting you with the offerings. We have our second edition of our Pathways to Membership class today after church. Lunch is provided. Curiosity group on Wednesday, February 22nd. And our Elderhood and Spirituality course is continuing. I'm sure we can take some new folks. Oh, yeah. They'd like to, from aging to saging. So if you would like to forget about the aging thing and move on to your saging, this is the perfect opportunity, and that's on Thursdays. And all of these are in your order of service, so take them home and hang them on your refrigerator. And I'm also so pleased to announce our guest preacher, someone I'm sure many of you know, the Reverend Rosalie Rimrott, who I am so lucky to have a winter Texan UU ministerial colleague. That is just the most awesome thing. The only downside is that she leaves in spring. So really grateful and excited to have her here preaching about some of my very, very favorite stories, important, inspiring stories in Unitarian Universalism. All right, that's it for announcements. It's our custom in this church to offer visitors and newcomers a chance to introduce themselves if they feel comfortable doing so. So if it's your first, second, or third time here, we invite you to stand as you are able or raise your hand and tell us who you are and where you are from. Anyone who would, any visitors here today who would like to introduce themselves?
I'm Clarice Krippner. I'm from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I am a longtime fan and friend of Rosie's.
Welcome. Welcome. Anyone else?
I'm Renee. I'm from here locally, and it's my third time.
Welcome to everyone. So glad to have you here today. I now invite you into a time of worship.
morning. The opening words are from Edward Everett Hale. I am only one, but I am still one. I cannot do everything, but I can still do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do something that I can. And Kyra will be lighting the chalice today. Please rise for the reading of the covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church, and truth is the sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need, and that all souls shall grow with harmony into the divine. Thus to be covenant with each other and with all we hold sacred. The hymn this morning is Soon the Day Will Arrive. And now if the children would join us on the storytelling quilt. Am I on? Okay. Hello. So this story is a story about the children in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. Anybody born in 1963? Well, the children of Birmingham were tired of being cut out of swimming pools and restaurants and playgrounds just because of the color of their skin. They were tired of being treated unfairly because they were black. And so the children heard about a man called Dr. Martin Luther King, and he was having marches for freedom. Well, they wanted to march for freedom too. So they went to Dr. King and they said, "We want to march for freedom." And Dr. King looked at them sadly, and thought, it's very dangerous. The freedom marchers were attacked by angry dogs, and they were attacked with fire hoses that would knock them down, and some men had clubs that would hit them with clubs. But Dr. King looked at the children's eyes, and they saw the light of freedom in them. And he knew that whether or not he said yes, they were still going to march. And so he said, "Yes, you can come on our freedom marches." And so the day came in May 5th, 1963, 3,000 children came together, ages 6 to 16, and they came together for a march. And they marched down the street, and they saw a line of policemen in front of them. And there was a man with a megaphone that said, "There is no march today, turn back now." Well, the children thought, should we turn back? What are we going to do? But then they remembered a story that they had heard many times. And it was the story of Moses leading his people out of Egypt and slavery. And the story goes that they reached the Red Sea. And the people said, "What are we going to do? Where can we go? There's the Red Sea in front of us. There's Egypt. There's the Pharaoh's army behind us. What are we going to do?" And so Moses sat down and he prayed. And then he rose up with his head held high, and he began to sing. "Ain't gonna let no Red Sea turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let no Red Sea turn me around. I'm gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, marching into freedom land." And so Moses, really? And so Moses went ahead and touched his toe into the Red Sea, and the Red Sea parted. And his people were able to walk on dry ground. There was a wall of water to the right of them and a wall of water to the left of them, and they just march on through. And the children of Birmingham remembered that. And so they got together and they started marching. And the man with the megaphone said, "Unleash the dogs and bring out the fire hoses." And the officers, the policemen, refused to obey. And the man said, "Unleash the dogs and bring out the fire hoses." Again, there was only silence. And the children marched forward. And when they got to the line of police, the policemen parted and they walked on through. There was a line of police to the right and a line of police to the left. And the children, some of them with tears in their eyes, and the children marched on through because they had the courage and the faith to go forward to the promised land, and they didn't let nobody turn them round. Children may now go to classes.
Our church community is given life through the contributions of its members and friends. In addition to generously offering our time and talents, monetary contributions are just as necessary to sustain us. It is just one more way we show our care and concern for each other and our community. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
Before we sing for you, we want to thank everyone who was here last night. We raised over $1,000 for the church. Congratulations. And a big thanks to so many people. If you helped last night, many of you are here. Jessica is here. Sylvia is here. Raise your hand if you helped last night. Let's give them a round of applause. And some of them even sang.
And played instruments.
And played instruments.
Where's the book? Oops. So we celebrate Marshall White's and Glenn Bowles' 41st anniversary on February 14th. Another comment was, have been so welcomed here. A joy to see Reverend Chris Hockman by P&M Mosley. Zeta Blue Rinken, turning 3 years old today. Yay. All right. The meditation reading is for those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice. For those of us who are imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk. For by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it may not remain. And when the sun sets, we are afraid that it may not rise again in the morning. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak remembering we were never meant to survive. This morning we will have our candle lighting, and once again we have two sand containers to come up and light your candles for joys and concerns. They will first have a couple of moments of silence, and then the music will begin playing, and you will be invited to come up the center aisle and light your candle of joy or concern.
In the African American tradition of spirituals, you'll hear the theme about going to heaven quite often. Unfortunately, it is true that for many people who are born as slaves, and even in many years past that experience, the only release from that life of difficult indenturitude and torture in many of those occasions was to look forward to going to heaven and being released to a kingdom where one would finally be free. This African American spiritual talks about going away to Marbletown, which talks about the tombstones found in the cemetery. But I hope that you find hope here in the spiritual as the author did, in finding that spirituality of freedom, whether it be on this planet or in another realm.
This reading is from Frederick Douglass. Those who profess for freedom, to favor freedom, and yet depreciate agitation, are people who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want ocean without the awful roar of its waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out what people will submit to, and you will have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. In this Black History Month / President's Day / Month of Love, can they put anything more into 1 month? You will hear tidbits of all three. As I look at where we are today in our progressive movements, it feels like we are losing ground. But 9 years ago, we welcomed the first African American family into the White House. I truly never thought I would see that day come. No matter what you thought of the following 8 years in office, we can't discount this historical moment. On August 28, 1963, on the steps of Lincoln Memorial, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. proclaimed his dream of the United States of America. And on January 20th, 2009, in front of the U.S. Capitol, Barack Hussein Obama took the oath of office to become the President of the United States of America. A colleague, Reverend Kawa Komoto, likes to play with numbers. He has calculated that from the Lincoln Memorial across the National Mall to the steps of the U.S. Capitol is a distance of 1.9 miles. It will have taken 45 years, 4 months, and 23 days for us as a nation to make that journey from one historic spot to the other. If you're curious, that's a speed of 7 inches per day, a seeming glacially slow speed. But because of hope, courage, perseverance, and patience of so many, and willingness to continue to put one foot in front of the other, it has been a journey that has been possible within some people's lifetime. I am so pleased that it has been in mine. I don't know if I will see a second or even a woman in the White House, but I'm glad I lived to see that historic moment. On the day Barack Obama became president-elect, the Unitarian Universalist Association sent a bouquet of yellow roses to Marie Reeb Maher, widow of Reverend James Reeb, and to their children. Similar yellow roses bouquets were sent to the daughters of Viola Liuzzo, a Unitarian Universalist from Detroit. I went on a search to discover the significance of yellow roses. I knew that they were a symbol of the women's right to vote movement, but I never understood why they became symbolic of that movement or how they evolved to become a symbol of support for our fallen civil rights activists. Apparently because yellow is the color of the sun, it is associated with light and warmth. Yellow roses have become a symbol of friendship, appreciation, and also of freedom. Yellow roses were sent by President Lyndon Johnson, to the hospital where Reverend James Reeb lay dying. The Unitarian Universalist Association was just shy of 4 years old when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. sent an urgent telegram to its Boston headquarters on March 7, 1965. asking for religious leaders and concerned citizens to join him in Selma, Alabama, where African Americans marching for the right to vote had been brutally attacked by lawmen. Two of the Unitarian Universalists who responded to that paid with their own lives. Reverend Clark Olson, who was with Reverend Orloff Miller, witnessed the events that ended the life of Reverend Jim Reeb, and he recalls what happened. My Selma has been a mixture of anger, fear, sorrow, wonder, and pride. Anger about Jim Reeb's death, about those who attacked, and the three of us, and about the Alabama system of justice, including an all-white, all-male jury that found innocent the three men who had been charged with killing Jim. Selma was fear, the men coming across the street shouting angry words, carrying a club, waiting at the clinic while the doctor examined Jim, fearing Jim's death as he squeezed my hand more tightly as his head pain increased and before he sank into unconsciousness. Fearing for all of us when our ambulance had a flat tire just after leaving the Selma city limits on the way to the hospital in Birmingham, and the ambulance radio telephone wouldn't work. Especially fearing when the car full of white men pulled up behind us on the country road, then followed us back to town while we drove on the rim of a flat tire, headed for a phone that would bring a replacement ambulance. Fear turned to terror when the car full of men parked next to our waiting ambulance and walked around the ambulance, knocking on the windows. I thought that they might bury us in a watery ditch that night, the same kind of ditch where 3 civil rights workers had recently been found in Mississippi. And fear that Jim would die before we arrived at the Birmingham hospital. And Selma was sorrow that Jim, this good man, as President Lyndon B. Johnson called him in his address to Congress, left his family to be in Selma, walked with Orloff and Clark Olson on that Selma sidewalk in the position next to the curb that was the most vulnerable to the attacker's club, that we weren't able to get help quickly, that he had very little chance, if any, of surviving the blow. And then his wife and children had to deal with his terrible blow to them as well. Wonder and pride were also a part of my Selma mixture. Wonder or amazement at the media attention at the site in the hospital of the President Johnson's gift of yellow roses, and at his dispatch of presidential aircraft to bring Marie Reeb and Jim's father to Birmingham before Jim's body gave out. Amazement that Jim's martyrdom apparently moved President Johnson to urge Congress to pass the voting rights bill. Jim Reed's daughter, Anne, gave words of gratitude for the yellow roses sent by the UUA on the day of that Obama won the election. She says, "My father would be glad to know that his sacrifice had brought about the change that we've seen through this U.S. election. My heart is at peace." In March 1965, 3 weeks after the murder of James Reeb, after seeing on television the events that would later be called Bloody Sunday, Viola Liuzzo had a crisis of conscience. Liuzzo, a Unitarian Universalist from Detroit, a mother of 5, a wife of a Teamster leader, answered the call of Martin Luther King Jr. to join the Voting Rights March in Selma, Alabama. With her nursing background, she believed she could use her car as an ambulance to help beaten and hurt marchers. 1 week after her arrival, while shuttling a civil rights worker between Selma and Montgomery, she was killed by 4 members of the Ku Klux Klan. She was the only white woman killed in the civil rights marches, and her funeral was attended by many dignitaries. For a brief moment after the murder, Liuzzo was a martyr, mourned by the nation, her murder condemned by President Lyndon Johnson, although he sent no yellow roses to console the family. That moment faded quickly, though, as the stories about her started spreading, that she was sexually involved with the black man that she was transporting, that she had abandoned her family, that she had a drug problem, that she had been institutionalized for emotional problems, that her husband had mob connections. Some of these stories came from the Klan, some from the local Alabama police, seeking to deflect the attention from their failure, indeed their refusal to protect the civil rights marchers. But many of the stories, which had little basis in fact, came from the Federal Bureau of Investigation on orders from the FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. The reason? The FBI informant had been riding with the Klansmen who murdered Liuzzo. He may even have been, and probably was, the one that had shot her. Like the local police, the FBI wanted to squirm out of the harsh glare of negative publicity, and demonizing Liuzzo was the way to do it. The rumors about Liuzzo spread, and they stuck. Liuzzo wasn't a civil rights martyr. She was a bad mother. She was crazy. She was looking for a cause. She was asking for it. More than 30 years later, at great cost to her family, the record had finally been set straight. Mary Stanton, in her book, From Selma to Sorrow, The Life and Death of Viola Liuzzo, tells a very different story about a woman that was ahead of her time. She was a loving mother and dedicated civil rights volunteer, but also a woman seeking to define herself in ways that we would only later come to understand and appreciate from a progressive and feminist perspective. Her story, however, is not just about the civil rights martyr and about a government betrayal and cover-up, but also about the cost to her family, which crumbled under the relentless and mostly phantom attacks on her character. In the summer of 2000, Paola de Flora began making a film about the story and the subsequent lives of her children. The documentary, Home of the Brave, was the result. This film is primarily the story of Mary, Viola's oldest daughter, and the steps she took to resolve the questions that lingered about her mother's character as a result of the slander against her. She says, "The seed of doubt that was planted as a 17-year-old girl gnawed at me. Part of her still wondered what her mother was doing down there. After years of burying her mother emotionally, Mary was driven to venture southward to the Selma that took her mother's life in order to discover and reclaim the love of her mother. I'm tired of apologizing for who she was," says Mary. "I just want to love her. I want to remember her life, not her death." Mary's story tells of a family's disillusioned and embittered by a government bent on villainizing not only their mother, but also their entire family. The two boys, Tommy and Tony, became so disillusioned that they were driven to the deep woods and survivalist groups out of fear and distrust. Mary, however, through her travels on her mother's Selma path, came to an understanding of the deep compassion that her mother felt, the important work she did, and the historic impact of her mother's death had on the passage of the Voters' Rights Act. Viola's death, along with the domino effect of many events following, allowed me to see in my lifetime this incredible event that took place in Barack Obama's inauguration. Viola Liuzzo's family also received yellow roses on November 2009, from the UUA. Sally Liuzzo, the youngest daughter, responded, "It has been a crazy, happy, wonderful 2 days. My inbox is flooded with Google alerts of articles and blogs which mention my mom. Yes, we received the flowers. They were absolutely gorgeous and in a beautiful art glass vase. I have already decided to refill the vase with yellow roses on significant days to remember my mom. I cannot begin to explain the sense of pride I have right now for my mother and all the civil rights activists of that time. I feel like everything they had fought for has now been realized. Black children will no longer feel that they are less than, that they will know they can be anything they set their mind out to be." Now, in 2018, we know that Mary's hope for the future has not yet been realized, and that we have many more miles to walk to fulfill that dream. She continues, "Thank you for my sisters and I for never forgetting our mother. The three of us were totally overcome with emotion. I feel like Mom's sacrifice has now been worthwhile. Yes, she made a huge difference. I'm so proud of America for getting past the limitations of race and vote for what is best for the country. Actually, we feel like Mom reached out through the UUA to send these flowers. The yellow roses told us that she had a hand in it. She has a mighty strong spirit that is alive and well. Thank you, and God bless." Reverend Reeb and Viola Liuzzo did not intend on committing heroic acts as they marched for the idea of voters' rights. Sure, it was a dangerous place, and they knew it, but tens of thousands of people marched that week. Some of those were hurt, but all but 3 returned home. Jimmy Lee Jackson, whose death precipitated the march, Reeb, and Liuzzo. These were dangerous times and dangerous places, but violence knows no time or place. It will erupt anywhere at any time. Homes, schools, street corners, workplaces, churches have all known their share of violence. I had just completed my service in Knoxville, Tennessee in November 2007, and I began my service in Bloomington Normal, Illinois. I was on my summer break in Cedar Rapids, Iowa on Sunday morning, July 27, 2008, when I got a call from my sister that she had heard on the news that there had been a shooting in a UU church in Tennessee. I immediately thought, well, it must have been Nashville. It was a bigger city than Knoxville and the capital of the state. Knoxville had very few shootings. It couldn't possibly be Knoxville. But when she called back and said that, yes, it was Knoxville, my heart sank. These were my friends who I had just said goodbye to a mere 8 months earlier. They were all very much in my mind and in my heart as I began my ministry in Illinois. When I called the church, it was just half an hour after the shooting occurred. Pandemonium was still in play. They had better things to do than to talk to me on the phone. So I went to my sister's house to watch the news on TV. There I learned from a cold television screen that my friend, Greg McHenry, was one of the 2 dead and that 6 others were injured. On Monday morning, I headed back to Bloomington to wash a load of clothes and pack again for a trip south. I had been camping for a month and didn't have any clean clothes. By 4 p.m. that day, I was headed south. I arrived in Knoxville around 11 a.m. I tried to find out what I could do. The UUA trauma team was already on site. The UUA president, then President Bill Sinkford, was there. I heard about the interfaith community-wide service that was held the night before at the Second Presbyterian Church next door. This was the church just up the hill that sheltered the children and kept them safe until they could be reunited with their parents. I heard about the spontaneous singing of Tomorrow by the children's cast of Annie Jr., whose production that Sunday morning was shattered by gunfire. I talked with Barbara McKendry, Greg's widow, and Taylor, Greg's and Barbara's foster son. Barbara had been in charge of the costumes for Annie and was busily trying to find putting them away and finding the owners of some of the props. Taylor's story is a story of this congregation's love and generosity. Taylor came to TVUUC as a 16-year-old with his biological mother. The church participates in a citywide ecumenical program that provides shelter for 1 week, 4 times a year for homeless families. Taylor and his mother came in the program to live for a week at TVUUC. As he read the posters on the walls and the church literature, he understood that this church might be welcoming of his very unusual lifestyle and characteristics. Taylor was flamboyant, questioning his orientation and his identity, wears dresses sometimes and eyeliner sometimes, and has led a life of deep pain and sorrow. He came from a family of alcohol and drug abuse, which made him vehemently opposed to both. He found comfort and friends in the youth group as he was removed from his mother's care and tossed around from school to school, family to family. The congregation embraced him. At last, Barbara and Greg said he could live with them for the summer as they began the process of foster care training. Finally, Taylor found a couple that accepted him unconditionally and a congregation that no matter how he dressed on Sunday morning would welcome him. I wondered that first day what would happen to Taylor now. It soon would be clear that Taylor would stay with Barbara as they offered each other the love and support so sorely needed at that time. As the day went on, I tried to figure out what my role would be. The UUA trauma team was on site. They had the training to counsel and to help the staff keep things together. It became clear that I was in too much pain myself to counsel. I was needed just to cry and hug the people whom I had served for 3 years. So that is what I did. I walked with them into the sanctuary to see what had been a place of song and worship and joy, now riddled with pellet holes. I listened to their stories and tried to piece together what had happened. Some of the stories contradicted each other. That was normal. In the anxiety of the moment, even eyewitness accounts get jumbled. The church was filling up with flowers and cards and food in the days that followed. I remember seeing a bouquet of yellow roses. Perhaps they were from the UUA. I didn't know enough then to catch the symbolism or to look to see who sent them. A local alternative elementary school sent over thousands of peace cranes that hung from every entryway. People were put to work sending thank you cards to those that sent flowers and putting into binders the cards and letters and condolences that were received. They come from across the country and even as far away as Transylvania, Romania. The trauma team and leadership were making plans for Greg's memorial service on Saturday and the sanctuary rededication service on Sunday. Greg McKendry had larger-than-life personality. He volunteered for everything in the church. He ushered, he greeted, he worked on buildings and grounds. He was a board member. Anything that needed doing, you can count on Greg to do it. For 2 years, he and Barbara taught Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. Once having been completely broke, he was now adamant about financial planning and helping others to get out of debt. I wondered as I stood on the spot where he fell, what his last thoughts were. Did he know that his large frame was shielding a 5-year-old girl from the turkey shot about to explode from the gunman's rifle? What about James Reed? He had already put his luggage into his colleague's car earlier in the day that he was shot. Then at the last minute, he decided to stay another day. What was that choice all about? Viola Liuzzo was ready to head back to Detroit, but she agreed for one last trip to Montgomery to receive some car keys that the transportation team desperately needed. She grew up in the South. She knew how dangerous driving with a black man in the front of a seat of a car after dark was for her. Why did she decide to do it? Greg McKendry made a choice. A movement a couple of steps in one direction could have taken him out of the shooter's sights, and a little girl would have been killed or severely injured. But instead, he moved between them. He is remembered as a hero, and so he is in so many more ways than how he was killed. In Newsweek in 2009, there was an article by Reverend Chris Bice, minister of TVUUC. In it, he explains that the shooter picked a liberal congregation because he thought liberals were soft on terror. He discovered differently. Bice says, in our church, the word liberal is meant to describe whom we include, not who we exclude. Our understanding of liberalism speaks to a generosity of spirit that transcends partisan politics. The trial for Jim David Addison, the man accused of attacking the church, was set for March 16, 2009. A reporter asked Reverend Bice what he would like to result from their day in court. He responded, justice. And what does justice look like, he was asked. Where our children are safe, he responds. For weeks, people would come up to him and ask them, how are the children? Fortunately, none of the children were injured, but they injured in body. They continue to work on healing the spirit, and healing has its own timetable. And a sign at the entrance of the parking lot still says, everyone welcome, and they mean it. He concludes the article by saying, members of my congregation have been hurt, but we have also been healed by the feeling that there is love greater than our theological differences, a compassion that is not limited by the boundaries of any creed. I firmly believe now that love is stronger than death. Love is more powerful than hate. But here we are as a country facing more violence, and again, our children are not safe. Let us remember that there is more work to be done and get about the doing. And let us honor these who stood up and gave their lives for values that were deeper than hatred, and all those who today stand between violence and innocence, between hatred and love. As a footnote, I would like to share that Taylor is now Phoebe, living happily as a woman, still flamboyant, and still totally awesome. Blessed be. Before we sing this wonderful hymn, I would like to share some words from a colleague, Aisha Ananso. Black History Month and Martin Luther King Day is a time when particular songs are sung. One of them is Lift Up Our Voice and Sing. It gets sung in school and church and various celebrations. It's a very, very powerful song, and it's often sung without context, and at times it's sung without a lot of intentionality. When you sing, lift every voice and sing, do you pay close attention to the words? It's easy on Sunday morning to open the hymnal and sing along without necessarily processing what we're saying, what words we're saying really mean. Sing a song full of faith that the dark past has taught us. Bitter the chastening rod felt in the days when hope unborn has died. We have come over a way with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. This song deserves to be sung with attention. It is a song starkly names the horrors and violence of racism in this country, and it is a song that should make us uncomfortable. Uncomfortable with the history that it calls upon, uncomfortable with the fact that the struggle for racial justice continues, and it has not come quite so far as we should have by now. How can anyone sing the words, treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, without a deep, deep discomfort? So when we sing this song, will you join me in singing with intentionality? Will you join me in the deep discomfort that I will be feeling in singing these words? Discomfort with the pain and horror that these words refer back to and discomfort with the fact that those words do not only refer to the distant history, but also to what is happening now. Will you commit to sitting with your own discomfort, and then will you tap into that discomfort and do something? Will you lift up your voice and sing until earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty?
Please rise and join us as you're willing and able.
From Paul Robeson, I shall take my voice wherever there are those who want to hear the melody of freedom or the words that might inspire hope and courage in the face of despair and fear. My weapons are peaceful, for it is only by peace that peace can be attained. The song of freedom must prevail. Go in peace. Blessed be. Namaste.